Men's pleasure is like fire, quick to ignite and very quick to put out. But women's pleasure is like water. It takes a lot of time for the water to boil and equally a good amount of time for it to cool down. If she talks about what her needs are, she's usually called a slut. If she knows what her needs are, she's usually called very demanding. If she knows what she wants, then she's called also very dominating. And if she asks what she wants, then she can be called very dominating. Why is it that women from ages ago till today are always stigmatized and taboos that have been created around women's sexuality? Debunk all the myths, some taboos that go on from ages and years and centuries ago, also taking examples how liberated they were back in the day and how different movements influenced how women's sexuality became a commodity, and how today we will be going through these movements to liberating female pleasures, breaking taboos from ancient texts to modern movements. A very simple way to look at it. Now, why is it that the men's orgasm has always been given more importance than the women's orgasm? There clearly is an orgasm gap that we are going through, and as we know, men come too soon and women take a while for that. So why is it that the emphasis and the importance has always been given to the men's orgasm? Well, because men's orgasm is related to reproduction and women's orgasm isn't. So if you're not reproducing, then what is the point of you even having an orgasm? Is the thinking that has been going on for quite some time in many texts and in many societies. Texts, ancient texts like Kama Sutra written by Vatsyayana was a technical book. It was like a treatise that was written back in the day for wealthy men to attain a wife or how to live. If you really go and study the Kama Sutra, there are 7 sections, and most of the sections talk about how to build a home, how to find a wife, how to maintain the wife, how to get someone else's wife, because if you are in that business and if she's married to a wealthy person, how do you get access to that husband? Through the wife. So there are many other things that Kama Sutra speaks about that we don't really know about. Modern day books have re-evaluated Kama Sutra and have shown us as these positions. Sure, positions are a part of it, but a very small part of it. The second section of Kama Sutra speaks about pleasure, but for men and women. From back in the day, this section of Kama Sutra was written for men to be able to teach men, because women, as we know, they naturally, intrinsically know it. But it was also targeted to women for their pleasure to be as equal as the men's. If you really go back from the Kama Sutra and study it from back in the day, what they speak about sex as per se is energy, it's Shakti as we know it. And this Shakti, this energy, has 52 intersections of energy in our body. And this energy is pleasure. But pleasure in all its sense is just sensuality. And just imagine when all your senses are alive, what and how do you usually feel? But we've always been taught that the man's pleasure is the most important and the woman's pleasure depends on the man. That's far from the truth. In the Kama Sutra, there is a very interesting topic on jewelry, ornamentation. It was almost like, when we usually have sex in this time, in today's time, it's like, it's like lights off, get into your most comfortable clothes so you can get out of it and all of it. But in the Kama Sutra, there was a whole section on adorning yourself, getting ready for the act. It never really spoke about the act as per se, but it spoke about the foreplay, the pleasure part of it. So gets ready for the act, gets dressed up for this beautiful event which is going to happen. But jewelry was a very important part because each part of her body was adorned with different jewelry. It could be something like the Jingling Girdles, which became very famous. That is, if a woman was to be on top, which is a position usually the man has because he's the one who knows better and his pleasure is better. But in the Kama Sutra, it was taught that if she was to be on top, she had to be in a particular position, maintain her movement in such a way that she does not move her body up and down, but just her hips up and down. So she can access the points which can give her the pleasure in those points, through those points, while also the man gets his. But there was a technique to it. So what she was wearing around her waist, the ghungroos were not to make any noise. The bells were not to make any noise, and she was to move in a manner, trains herself to move in a manner where these ghungroos don't make any noise. Then she's able to access those points of hers as well. Trains herself. The Kama Sutra also, well, it also spoke about perfumes, how important perfumes were. It was like she had to, it was like, you put a different kind of a smell, a different kind of a perfume to different parts of your body. So it's like when your lover is coming to different parts of your body, he is very present in that moment and is completely in that moment of absorbing all these different senses. Another reason for it was when you are with someone for a very long time, which is your partner, your husband, or whoever, sometimes, the act in itself can become very monotonous. You start thinking about, okay, you're doing the same thing with your partner, you know what he likes, you know what you like, and perhaps sometimes that is when a couple goes through some kind of a monotony. And that is when you have these senses, you have these beautiful perfumes that are applied to different parts of your body or to different areas of the bed. It makes you come back to the act in itself. So there were these little sensorial things mentioned in the Kama Sutra, which not only focused on the men's part, but also primarily in many ways the woman's pleasure as well. Related to one simple fact that if a woman's pleasure is reached to its height, the universe will be in balance. Always depicted women as active participants in the sexual activity rather than being passive about it. In many cultures, well, I'm from India, so I would like to speak from that perspective, is, India, look at the population that we have. Of course, people are engaging in different kinds of sexual activities, but also the woman's sexuality and the woman's pleasure is something that's always given like a subordinate level of way of looking at it. The Bollywood movies that you see, the movies that have been created, the TV shows that are made, always show that the man is the one who's enticing, who is starting to flirt with her, and she's the one who's shy, which is fine. Girls are shy, not all of them, but yes, which is fine. But it's always shown like it is something, like, whenever he wants to engage in the act, even if it's his wife, she would be like, oh, I have a headache, oh, today no, she'd always make excuses. It's almost like she is not interested in feeling pleasure. Literally, because if she is the one who's expressing that she also has her needs, then it would be tamed, or she would be named as someone who is bad, as it's bad for a woman to express her needs and to have pleasure. So the Kama Sutra from all these 2000 years back was very progressive, as women were very vocal, as they were taught how and in what ways they could receive maximum pleasure, and in the same way how they could give a maximum pleasure. So both the unions were very balanced. Where did these taboos and stigmas started? If we go back in history, it started in many different eras. But let's go back to the Black Death in Europe. Around this time, there was a hunger for labor, many people had died. It created a whole new concern around marriage and reproduction. It coincided with certain heretic movements like the Cathars, contradicted those of the established church. Fast forward to the 1400s, witchcraft appeared as a first form of heresy. It's the eye. You speak about witch hunts from that time, but the witch hunts were a lot more than just witch hunts. It was about controlling women's bodies for the creation of a certain labor market and the creation of a peasant class in post-feudal Europe. 1500s, we had colonization, and it began to bring silver in Europe. And the more silver came, the more people were kicked out, and the land was turned into commercial use. And eventually, it caused women to lose their standing in land. We've spoken about this in one of the previous videos on patriarchy, where we literally spoke about the analysis of farming, of how back in the day, how patriarchy started through farming and through agriculture. And so-called witches were basically women who were able to stop reproduction. The witches were the women who knew about reproductive health. And these were the ones who were targeted for witchcraft. As the women were the one who knew about farming, knew about herbal health, that's why the accusation of witchcraft interfered with procreation, because the women were helping other women, and including things like abortion. The Pope that accused witches of abortion and contraception. Well, women back in the day also knew that, in general, women have their rights to choose. They have the choice to give birth or not. And when they were forced into it, they started to put into practice the studies that they had, the knowledge that they had. And when they started to actually apply it, they were called witches, because witches were the ones who were stopping the reproduction process. and hence stopping the commercial process of how, the entire capitalization and capitalism was literally built. Then we had angels in the house, the Victorian idol of domesticity. Man must be pleased, but him to please. Is woman's pleasure down's gulf? Is woman's pleasure down the gulf? Condoled necessities, casts her best, flings herself. These were the lines of the Victorian right. These were Coventry Patmore describing the perfect woman. The female protagonist of the work of this writer was always submissive, lacking autonomy, charming, but never really voicing. These were made to be the essential characteristics of becoming a good wife. The perfect wife. A self-sacrificing woman who would sacrifice everything for the man, would do everything for the pleasure of the man, for the happiness of the man. And she would put herself at stake because she doesn't really matter. Actually, also go back in time at this era, we had Tawaifs in India, we had Devdasis in India who were trained courtesans, who were trained dancers, trained singers. They were the epitome of grace, prestige, privilege, and also education. Many of the Nawabs, many of the kings at that point, when they were almost like they were sent to these places where the Tawaifs would train these young kings on etiquette. So at that point in India, pre-independence, it was looked at, the Tawaifs were looked at as someone who were very reputable with a lot of knowledge, trained in their craft, and artists in their own sorts. But when the British came to India, when they started to capture India, they started looking at these Tawaifs as nautch girls. And then they started initiating all these kinds of laws which pulled them down and took away the art, the respect out of their job, and basically made them into a category, put them into a category of prostitutes and sex workers. Hence, the narrative changed. If you see from back in the day, the Victorian era was very conservative. You would have, the perfect wife, the example that we just saw, and also Devdasis, who were these beautiful trained dancers, or Tawaifs, who were these beautiful trained dancers, and they were not necessarily meant to engage in any kind of a sexual exchange with their patrons. It was not necessarily a part of it. So, but when the British came and when they looked at all these beautiful Devdasi dancers, showing their midriff, being very vocal and being very sensual and actually seducing by just laughing, by just, being themselves. What is seduction? Seduction doesn't necessarily have to involve any kind of literally like looking at you and like, playing with your fingers and doing all of that. No, seduction can be just you being yourself, you being so open in the way you laugh. And your laughter is you seducing. The way you talk, with the passion that you talk with, that is seduction. Seduction has many different meanings. So when back in the day we had these Devdasis being so unabashed and so unapologetic and so passionate about their dance, because they were the Devdasis who were dedicated to the god. They had dedicated their lives to the gods, literally married to the gods. So when the British came, they looked at these beautiful women, beautiful Indian women, beautiful trained dancers, dancing in these beautiful temples, showing their midriff, having these postures, dance postures, where they were expressing all their emotions with so much of passion. They looked at them as seductresses, as the seductress, and called them nautch girls, and literally said that, the way they are dressing, the way they are dancing, unabashedly, it is just completely against what the British culture is and should be, because they were the ones who were very orthodox back in the day, and hence they wanted to pull them down, and they translated the laws into this. Taboos and stigmas started to get established from ages on. But slowly, as we keep moving forward, slowly, thanks to feminism, thanks to so many women's rights movements, that these practices have been trying to change, or at least still people are trying to change it, be it through the Me Too movement, empowers women to speak against sexual assault and harassment, or the slut walk movement, which challenges slut shaming and promotes sexual agency. And movements demonstrate how embracing and asserting female pleasure can be a form of resistance and empowerment. We also have great literature to look back to, norms and beliefs of how women are supposed to be completely clothed. Provided beautiful insights into female desire and sexual exploration, not only serve as educational tools, but also conversations about sexuality and intimacy of women. From books, we come to theatre, like Vagina Monologue. Use theatre to break the silence around women's bodies and sexuality. Or even online platforms like the Clit Test evaluate representations of female pleasure. Education always plays such a huge role in making women, as all of us, not only from one section of the society, but all of us feel safe, empowered, and open about having these conversations without feeling any kind of stigma, taboo, or any kind of limitations in expressing and feeling and not feeling guilty. We've always spoken about how women feel guilty when they are at leisure or they want to experience leisure. It could be, when you've had a whole day. Like even when working women or women who are married and have children, even after they've come home from work, which they've worked all day long at the offices, they come home from work, they are, cooking and taking care of their children and all of that. And then even if they have that one moment of leisure or they take one day off, they feel guilty. It is and I'm not blaming the men for it, I'm not blaming her husband for it or her in-laws for it, no. Well, that could be the case as well, but it's because women have always been told to feel because women have always been taught that, if you take some time off to yourself, you're guilty. If you leave your child and go to meet your friend, you are not a good mother. Well, everyone needs a little bit of time to recharge. Everyone needs leisure, because if you don't go through those moments of relax, you are going to go through burnouts. And we are in an age of constant feeding of information. So if you don't take those little breaks, you will always be operating on a very crazy level which will lead to burnout. So women have always been taught to feel guilty about taking time for themselves, guilty about guilty about going on a vacation, guilty about having a drink with a friend and leaving her husband behind, guilty about having, going for that hobby class that she always wanted about pottery and putting her child at her mother's place, or whatever the reasons could be, or guilty when you are in a sexual act with your boyfriend or with your partner or with whoever you are exploring. The men, as we usually know, come very soon, but the women take quite a bit of time. So there's always this guilt. Why do you think women fake orgasms? 80% of women don't come through penetration, and 80% of them, or maybe more, usually fake orgasms or have faked having an orgasm during the sexual act. Why is that? Because men come usually soon, and then if you do find men who are actually interested in giving the pleasure back to the women, voila, beautiful. And if you do find that, then it's usually, the women feel guilty because women take a lot of time. Like we said, the woman's orgasm is like water. It takes a lot of time to boil and a lot of time to cool down. So, the women feel guilty that, he's had it, he's done with his bit, and now it's really sweet. It's really, really sweet that, he wants to give me the pleasure as well. But while he's giving me the pleasure, it's been like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or I don't know, whatever time. And I'm still not coming on. So, I'm just going to fake it because I don't want to, there's the anxiety bit that comes in. There's the guilt fact that the guilt part that comes in. So all of these factors have always been there, existent intrinsically in women. And that is where we have to stop the narrative, break this narrative, and prioritize women's pleasure as well. Empowering through all these stories, from the ancient text to the current text, to the movements, to these contemporary literature, artworks, theater, all of it as examples to keep on asking for what you need, asking, demanding, telling, expressing, not being silent, expressing what your needs are, and making sure that they are fulfilled with a man or without a man. Sex toys are great. They are, I guess that is why many men do feel threatened by sex toys, because they're like, okay, if you have that, you don't need us. Well, depends, but yes. So don't be afraid to prioritize your pleasure. Don't be afraid to voice your needs. Don't be afraid to take space. Like, imagine a world where individuals of all genders feel empowered to explore and express their desires freely. Women who knows what she wants in the bedroom, outside the bedroom, and is vocal about expressing all of those needs, vocal about prioritizing her pleasure, prioritizing his pleasure, both the pleasures, then It is just a more balanced world. And this orgasm gap that we have been witnessing in the stats, in history, throughout history, in current moments, we need to find a way to bridge it. Stop by constantly, if a woman chooses to be with one partner, or if she chooses to have multiple partners, not at the same time, or if she chooses to have multiple partners, explore herself through multiple partners or through sex toys or through whatever it is her choice. We need to have sex education inculcated into all areas of our society through different age groups that promote consent, reproductive health, sexual health, and intimacy. Coming from India, being an Indian girl, growing up, in the 90s in India, we were always, whenever there would be a sex scene on TV or in a movie, we would always be like, oh my God, we're not supposed to watch it, or whatever. We're not supposed to look at it. Or, my family became progressive over a period of time, and it taught me a lot of things through my own journey. And all these movies that still continue to be made, where, the slowly, I guess, things are changing, but we don't have to wait for it to completely change. We have to change ourselves. So we have to stop assuming that a woman is supposed to just be a subordinate. She's just supposed to just sacrifice her happiness, be the submissive one, just, cater to the needs of the family or cater to the needs of the man, and she has to be always available for him for whatever his priorities are. No, an Indian woman or a woman in general, regardless of her nationality, regardless of her race, should be prioritizing her needs as well, her pleasure as well. Like we said, like the Kama Sutra said, if the female pleasure is attained, if the female pleasure reaches its height, then only we know that the universe is in balance.